So it's Design Masterclass. This is part two. Most of you were here last week. If not, you've downloaded or taken a look at it online. And we just want to go to the next slide, so we just run through the timing on this. So next, Quinn. All right, so we're going to look at double taper for the body, V-neck, set-in cap. Last week, of course, we started with classic body based on the bust measurements from bottom up to the beginning of the armhole shaping, and then shaping the armhole and adding a round neck at the same time. This week, we're going to look at a V-neck, just changing that, numbers the same, running through actually the sleeve cap. Last week we went through the sleeve, the tapered sleeve, and how to use the formula. And that increase-decrease formula that we went through last week, we're going to really keep going through it in different portions of it and how to use it. It's all basically the same once you see it. It's, big number, small number subtracted from big number, divided in half because we have two halves of the body and two halves of the garment. And then finding out how many rows or stitches we need and dividing in whatever we need into that. Okay, well, you'll see where we go. But you've gone through it last week, you've looked at it, you've probably studied your handouts, so it's going to be just a repeat of just sort of a solidification of what that is all about. So we're going to work through the double taper, then through the V-neck. Take a little break if you want. Last night, it's late at night when we come through and people wanted to just push through, but we can do that. And then we'll work through the tapered sleeve again, and then putting a cap on that sleeve. Okay, so next, Quinn. So here's the reference, and what's the difference? And we see with the pink color that on the outer side of this garment body schematic, that was the classic body. And then now we want to taper it. And one of the reasons for this is to just help everyone to understand that when they see a piece in a magazine, if they're doing a commercial pattern, for example, and they feel like, oh, I want to change the yarn, or I want to change from, I like a classic body versus a double taper, or vice versa. And maybe I'd like to do a V-neck, or if I have a V-neck, I'd rather do a round neck, that those things are very easily accomplished. And so here we go with just taking a look at what happens, and we'll do just a little bit of shaping to follow the natural lines of the body. All right, so next. So here we have the gauge. We're looking at it again. 5 stitches and 6 rows to an inch. And we're always following what are we getting with our hands, we're not machines, but for every inch of width and every inch of length. Width, if we're knitting from bottom to top, width being stitches, and length being rows. So here we had we have 35 inches in the hips, plus 2 inches of ease, so we got 37 inches at the bottom. The waist is 29 inches. We've got 2 inches of ease, 31. We see the centimeters out there, also 79 centimeters. And then for the bust, we're back to where we were before because the previous garment was based on the bust. So we have 33 inches when we measured the total circumference of the bust. We want to add 2 inches of ease. Ease is our decision, but in here we're going to add 2 inches of ease, giving us 35 inches total, which is 89 centimeters. And then we're going to work flat, so that's going to be 17 and a half. And the total length is going to be 25 inches. So, okay, next. So that sets the stage for whatever we need to do. So we look at this, we're taking a look here, and we're saying, okay, all the measurements that I just went through are here. They're on the schematic. We see where we're going from 94 stitches at the bottom in the hips to 80 stitches in the waist. That's the first stop that we're looking at. How do we do that? So we have 3 inches of length, the row gauge, that we're using to just work even Whenever we're going to do some type of a decrease or an increase, we usually want to work even for a little bit, whether it's an inch or whatever, it's just so that we don't get a hanging on the sides of the garment. So here we're going to work even for 3 inches. That's translating into 18 rows for us. And then we have 5 1/4 inches, which is 32 rows, that we're going to shape over. We're going to decrease to bring that hip width down to the waist width. So 94 minus 80 is going to give us 14 stitches that we have to decrease. We're going to divide that in half, and that's going to tell us that we're going to take out 7 stitches on each side over 32 rows. So we're going to take a look at that closely, because we really don't want to go beyond that 3-inch point and length when we're starting to make the change. We want 3 inches there, we want to start to make the decreases, and then we want to go up to the waist. We want to work 1.5 inches at the waist, we want to stop that, and then we want to go out into the bust. So we're going to make the first decrease right there at the end of the 18 rows. So we're going to take that out of what we're going to calculate. So we have 32 rows starting, and we have 7 stitches based on our math. We're going to take 1 away, and we're going to divide 6. We're going to take 1 row and 1 stitch on each side away in that sequence. And this, so you can do this with anything. You can use the formula for just what's the sections you really want to know how to increase or decrease in a very formal fashion and organized manner. So we have 6. After we take the 1 away, 6 stitches on each side, and we have 31 rows that we're going to work that over. And we see, 6 into 31, 5, and then 1 from 6 is 5. We've got all of our numbers set up, and that's telling us, as we see, as I always say, when you see the little arrows pointing, we know what we're doing, and the arrows tell us the number of times because they cross. So on every 5th row, 5 times, you're going to increase 1 stitch on each side of every 5th row, following 5th row 5 times, then on the following 6th row once. That's going to bring us right up. It's not like with stitches when you're going across the row and you want to balance both ends. What do? We went through that, and we're going to go through that when we look at the sleeve. But here, when you're doing rows, when it's a vertical use of the formula, it ends exactly on the row that you want it to end on. So here we've got we've come down to our 80 stitches. We're going to work even for that 1.5 inches at the waist. And now we'd like to go out to the bust, and the same thing will happen where it says waist to bust, and you see the math at the top. So we're looking at 80 stitches in the waist, 90 stitches in the bust. That's 10 stitches that we have to decrease 2 sides. So it's divided by 2. It's going to be 5 stitches on each side. But of course, after we've worked our 1.5 inches, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to stop, and we're going to make our first increase there. So we'll take that out of what we're putting into the formula. And the reason is because if we let's say we worked the waist width, the waist length, and then we did the formula with the number of rows that we would have like 5 more rows coming in the way it would be telling us to work, and we don't want that. So if you look at the top, we've subtracted 1 from the 5, so it's going to be 4. We've subtracted 1 from the 24, which was going to be 24 rows that we're going to be shaping for that 4 inches until we get up to the bust width. That's become 23. So this is telling us that we're going to increase 1 stitch on each side of every following 6th row 3 times, and then on the following 5th row once. And we're at the bust width. Here again, what I've said in the past and what I say all the time is that you have to remember that you don't want to make that last increase or the last decrease at the very top of the section that you're working on. I mean, you're increasing or decreasing to get to a width that meets your measurements and meets your ease requirements. That's for comfort. So once you get to that width, then you want to work even there for a little bit, whether it's at the top of your sleeve or whether it's at the top of the bust or whether even it's at the top of your neckline. You just want to work even there for a little bit, whether it's an inch at the top of the sleeve or the top of the bust. You're going to say an inch or 2 inches that you're going to work even. At the top of the neckline, usually it's going to be a ½ inch or an inch that you're going to work even. So here we're going to then work even once we've reached that width of the bust, which is 17.5, 44.5 centimeters. We're going to work even for 2 inches. And then we're going to start to shape the armhole. Something else is going to happen now, though, because instead of making a round neck, we're making a V neck. And shaping the armhole and starting to work the V neck are both going to happen simultaneously. So let's go to the next slide. You notice everything at the top will remain the same. The neck width will remain the same. The shoulder width will remain the same. But we're actually going to start the shaping a little earlier. So the next slide, please, Quinn. So when we look at making our V-neck, we decide how do we want to shape the V-neck. Do we want to shape it so that it's concave, meaning that it will open more quickly at the bottom, giving us a little more rounding at the bottom? And then if we have, for example, we would be interspersing usually every second row and every fourth row that we would be taking out one stitch as we make that V, sometimes maybe 2, depending on how quickly you're going to open the V, how long it is. You know, lots of variables come in. But in general, if you want to put the smaller number of rows that you're going to be making the stitches, taking the stitches out on at the bottom and stack those, then you're going to get more of a faster opening, a more rounding, and then doing the longer number of rows between decreases. So that's concave, and I always say it's as if you're caving in, so you remember that rounding. And then we have, or we could do convex. Convex, I would say, like if you're vexed, you're standing straight. So convex is that we would want to do the longer rows, like 4, if we're doing 4 and 2s, between decreases first, we'll stack those, and then have the V open more quickly by stacking the shorter rows, like every 2, above that. Or you can do straight, just a straight diagonal, and that's what we're going to do. And that's why we're going to figure out how to evenly intersperse 2s and 4s as we're going along. So we have concave, convex, or straight, and these are examples of that. So next page, please, Quinn. So this is what the V is going to look like. This is just the blank schematic. And we see that we are going to come out, take our armhole shaping and bring that extra width out. But at the same time, when we're starting, we're actually starting with the total number of stitches on the needles. And that happens to be 90 stitches, 88 plus 2 selvage stitches. So next page. All right, so here's some numbers. So we've got 17.5 inches. We're at the bust width. We've got 90 stitches on the needles. We've got 44 stitches on either side. And in the center, that should say 2. So we're going to have the first 2 stitches that we're going to be taking out. And we've got -3 on one side. So that's the very first shaping that we're going to be doing. So if we look at the top, then we're going to see that we've got 34 stitches still in the neck, and that we're going to have 17 stitches in each armhole, at the top of each shoulder there. That's going to give us our total of the 90 stitches on the needle. So let's go to the next page. So this is a summary. It's a little crowded, but it tells us everything. And that is that we have 6 3/4 inches. Remember, we started last week, we had 13.5 as the measurement for our crossback. And what we wanted was 50% of that in the neckline, so that was 6.5. 6 3/4, pardon me. And so we multiply that times our row gauge, our stitch gauge, which gives us 34 stitches in the back and across the back neck. So that's the neck width. And then we're looking at the first bind off. So this is the same as a sleeve when you have like the upper arm and you have the cuff. Here we have 34 at the top, we have 2 at the bottom. We subtract from the 34. There are 32 stitches that we have to concern ourselves with in terms of getting them out after we do the first decrease there. So we divide that in half. So we're going to take out 16 stitches on each side. So that's the very first part. Those are the stitches. And then for the rows, we start with the row gauge was 6 rows to 1 inch. The length of from the armhole, beginning of the armhole shaping to the shoulder was 8 1/4. We're going to multiply that by 6. So we have 50 total rows in our shaping for the armhole, and that's also going to be the shaping for the V-neck, because we're starting the V-neck shaping at the same time as we're starting the armhole shaping. So we have a 1/2 inch at the top that we're going to work even, and that's what I said, you don't want to work all the way up to the very top. So we're going to take those, subtract those rows from the 50, meaning we've got 46 rows remaining. And then when we come across the first row and we take the first 2 stitches out, we go all the way across that row and we come back, we've used up 2 rows there. So we're not going to add those into the formula as well. So what we have is 44 rows that we're going to shape over, and we're going to do that 16 stitches on each side over the 44 rows. So let's go to the next page. Okay, so here we see the 16 stitches that we need on each side. We see the total number of rows and how we've come to that, the 44. We've got the total V rows is 50, a 1/2 inch even at the top is 4. First decrease rows are going to take up 2. We have 44 stitches remaining. We have 16 stitches on each side because we started with 34 at the top, taking 2 out at that first decrease for the V, which is going to leave us with 32 divided by 2, 16 on each side. So we have 16 that we're dividing into the 44, but whenever we want to always come back to the same side of the garment, then we take half the rows out, meaning either we're not going to stop on the right side or we're not going to stop on the wrong side. So we've got 44 rows here, and we're only going to work on 22 of them, meaning always coming back to the right side of the work. So here, when we divide the 16 into the 22, it's 1, and we know that the 1 represents 2 rows. So I multiply it by 2 each time. And so it's going to be every second row, we're going to stop 10 times and take out 1 stitch. And then every 4th row, we're going to stop 6 times and take out 1 stitch. And so the 2 at the bottom, you see the 10 and the 6 will always add back up to the divisor, which is 16. And and at the top, it's the same theory. We go up by 1. So each of those multiplied by 2, giving us the exact rows that we're going to stop on, and then looking at the math check, the 2 times 10 giving us 20, and the 4 times 6 giving us 24 rows that we're covering, and then 16 stitches covering the 44 rows. And so we then also look for a common denominator to give us that interspersing, because we want to go up straight on the way we want our V diagonal to run. And so the ratio is going to be 5 2-stitch to 6 to 3. The denominator is 2. The common denominator is 2. That will go into both those numbers. So it tells us immediately when we see that, we're going to repeat this ratio, whatever it is, 2 times. That gives us that answer. And so the total decrease sequence is going to be 8. All right, 5 times with the 10 side, and then, we've got 3 times with the 6 side. Okay. All right, so let's move to the next page. I'll continue to explain. So this is the way it's going to run out. And it's so important to see everything that's happening on your piece and how you lay this out. And that is, we're going to be shaping the armholes at the same time as we're shaping the neckline. So we want to just stay on top of that in terms of what's coming out on what row. So here we've got the neck shaping and the armhole shaping lined up. Last week, you may remember that over 12 rows, I took out 10 stitches on each side. And that was as we went from 90 stitches in the body of the garment, which is now the bust of the garment, down to the shoulder to shoulder measurement that was 20 stitches less. Okay, 70. So we were taking out 10 stitches on each side. I used the length is usually between 1.5 and 3 inches of rows that you're going to use to get your armhole shaping done, and I used 12, which was 2 inches, because we're getting 6 rows to an inch. And so here we've got, it was 3, 2, 2, 1, 1, 1, 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, and you see that on each side. And this is just a picture of, on my worksheets, of exactly how that's going to work. Okay, so, and that runs all the way through. We see up to, you know, the end of the shaping there in terms of the number of rows. So next slide. And this is what it looks like when it's laid out. And that is that, you know, we see here again, we have a summary. This is always just to keep reminding us as we're knitting, so we're not ripping, and remember we're writing a pattern for other people to knit as well when we're designing. And here, so the total, the V, it goes through that, the total V neck, the depth, minus, you know, the 1/2 inch even at the top, minus the first 2 rows that we're working for the bottom. It shows exactly what we're doing in terms of the 16 stitches going into the 44. Also, and this is off, I'm reading off to the, on the right hand side, using the common denominator, so that we're seeing that we're going to do 3 to 5 each time, you know, so and that we're going to repeat those reps, the rep of that 3 to 5 ratio, we're going to repeat that 2 times. And then we've got, you know, math check on that, and then the decreasing ratio summary at the bottom. So here, just at a glance, you get to see everything that's going to happen there. And then we look at the actual run out here in terms of how we're doing the decreases, and we see the 2, 2, 4, 2, 4, 2, 2, 4. That ends halfway up, which is at 22. And so we see the 5 2s there, and we see the 3 4s. So 5 times we've opened with taking 1 stitch out every 2 rows, and 3 times we've used every 4th row. And we repeat that once more. It brings us up to the top. Either side, one side's going to, of course, be higher than the other when we finish the decreases. However, we're going to work even to through the same number of rows, which happens to be 50 here, and before we're binding off. And you also see the number at the top. You can see the total number of stitches that we're starting with going across the top of the neckline, which was 34. And we've opened up to that 34. The total number of rows is 50 rows. So all of that is here. And this is the way, you know, you're going to get the handouts, but just we're just showing you my working method, so that everything, if there are any questions, especially if someone's knitting your work, if you're selling your patterns, if you're publishing your patterns, that a tech editor might look at it. So all the questions are answered as well. And then we're knowing whether we're holding gauge, if the measurements are correct and all that. So, okay, next. All right, do we need a break? No. Okay, so we'll keep going. All right, so the next part of this presentation is the sleeve. And so we're looking at the tapered sleeve. And I talked last night.
Shirley, somebody did say they wanted a break.
Oh, they want
I'm not sure if you want to continue or you want to just take a break.
Okay, let's take a little break. If someone needs a break, all right, we'll take a break, about 7 minutes. we'll come back. All right, so we've gone through the body, we've gone through the neckline now, and now we'd like to go through the sleeve shaping. So we're looking at a tapered sleeve, and we're looking at just reviewing some things we reviewed last week. The tapered sleeve, of course, a taper is opening up, increasing or decreasing over a long number of rows, fewer stitches than rows. A slope is when you're taking out more stitches than rows. We always use the example of a shoulder slope, for example, where you're taking out 6 stitches at a time that we just saw when we worked the classic body to shape our shoulders over 18 stitches over 6 rows on each side, actually. So we're taking out a lot there. That's a slope. Here, slope is fast decreasing over slow number of rows of increases of length. And here, slow increases or decreases over a lot of length. All right, so what I'd like to do is just take a look at the bottom here. And we have 2 different gauges coming together. So if we look up on the side and we say, what are we getting here? So we're getting 5 stitches and 6 rows to 1 inch, which is our standard. That's what we're getting on the body of our garment. And then we're getting 7 stitches and 9 rows to 1 inch for the sleeve, for the ribbing. And that is an averaged ribbing, right? So we pull it all the way out, take a measurement, let it relax, take a measurement, add them together, divide it by 2, and that's what we're getting here. So we're getting 7 stitches and 9 rows to 1 inch. So what that means is that at the bottom we have 6.5 inches, which is 16.5 centimeters in the ribbing, and that's giving us 45 stitches. And why is because in order to have a balanced fabric and in order to be able to seam on the purl stitches at the edges, we usually put a knit stitch at each edge. So this is knit 1, purl 1, so we get knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1. It's a multiple of 2 plus 1. At the end, we would have a knit 1, which would turn under as our seaming stitches, and we would seam on the purls. So that's why we've got, with knit 1, purl 1, we have an odd number. So we've got 45 stitches there, and the body we've got 34 for that same width, which is 6.5 inches of width. So what I'd like to do is say, what do I do when I get to that row where I have to increase? I want 2 inches on my on the cuff of my ribbing. Once I get those to the 2 inches, and I'm going across my wrong side row, then what am I going to do? So I'm going to subtract. I'm going to begin by subtracting the smaller number from the larger number, which is the 45 and the 34, which means 11 stitches have to be increased as I go across that row, or decreased, pardon me, as I go across that row from the 45 to the 34. And so I'm going to divide 11 into 43. Remember when I said last time, you don't want to go to the very last row, the very last stitch. So you hold a stitch or two aside in the way that you're going to, you do the formula however you want so that it works best. And when we're going horizontally across, adding stitches, we always want to make sure that we have an even number at the front and at the back, meaning the beginning and the end. And so most of the time, we'll just take out some of the numbers. And so here, instead of dividing it into 45, I'm dividing it into 43, knowing that I've got 2 stitches that I'm going to be able to put at the end. So it's telling us from the answer that we're going to add, we're going to decrease on every 3rd stitch once, and then on the 4th stitch 10 times, right? So last week, as we discussed, when you're doing a decrease, it's a little different because 3rd actually means 2nd and 3rd because we got those stitches together. It's the ultimate number that we're concerned with. And 4th actually means 3rd and 4th. So what the 3rd would be, it would just be purl 1 because the second and third are going to be purled two together. And for the fourth, it would be purl two, because the third and the fourth are going to be together. So what that would read like is what we see here. It would be purl one, purl two together 10 times, purl two. All right, so you have a purl one at the beginning, purl one, purl two together. Okay, that's your first three. And that's the only one you're going to be concerned about there, because it's only three, the third stitch being involved once. And then purl two together. You're going to do that 10 times across the row. You've got the two remaining. And so that's it. Purl one, purl two together 10 times, purl two, and we're down to the 34 stitches that we're going to now shape over. So if we go to the next page, Quinn. All right, so we've got 34 stitches in the cuff. We've got 78 stitches in the upper arm. And so we're looking at all the things around what we're doing always. So we're laying everything out on this. And so we know how many total stitches we have. We know how many total rows we have, how many rows we have in the cuff, how many rows we have in the shaping, how many rows we're going to work even at the top of our shaping. So here we've got 2 inches in the cuff, but then we've got 15.5 inches total that we're shaping between the cuff and the beginning of the cap shaping. So when we look at the inside row off to the right, we see that we've got 88 rows, or 14.5 inches above our cuff, that we're going to shape over to get to that 15-inch width that we want at the top of our sleeve. And then we're going to work even at that width for 1 inch, which is 2.5 centimeters. On the opposite side, we see that the total is going to be 17.5 inches. Okay, from the cuff, we've got 15 inches on one side, from the top of the cuff to the top of the to the beginning of the armhole shaping. And on the opposite side, we want a total of 17 inches in that, including the cuff. So we've got 2 inches plus the 15 inches added together, which tells us from the beginning cast on to the beginning of our cap shaping, we want a total of 17.5 inches there. So all that's written there in order to help us, the inches, the number of rows, and all of that we're going to be working on. So now we know that over 88 rows we want to shape. And we know that we have 34 stitches at the bottom, and we've got 78 stitches at the top. So if we subtract the 34, from the 78, then that's going to tell us how many stitches that we're going to need in order to be able to work on each side. So that's 44 stitches. And so we set up our row here that tells us that we've got 44 divided by 2, because we've got 2 sides, is 22 stitches, or 22 stops along the row that we're going to stop and make an increase on each side. We're going to do that over 88 rows. And at the end of that, we should have 14.5 between the top of the cuff and the top of the beginning of the work even. We should have 14.5 inches there, and then we'll work even for 1 row and then shape the cap. So 22 into 88 is telling us that on every 4th row we're going to make an increase on each side. And what that tells us is this is the first time we've actually used the formula in this way that you've seen it. And instead of having to subtract, it's even, so an even division. So instead of having to subtract anything and add the extra remainder and the extra quotient at the top, it's just every 4th row 22 times, and that's the way we're writing it. And then at the end of that, we have 78 stitches. All right, next page, Quinn. Okay, so the sleeve is done up to the beginning of the cap shaping. So how are we going to shape this cap? We're going to look at everything that we know, and then what we're going to work on is what we don't know. First, we see that there are four, if you look out at the green part off to your right, there are four different sections to the cap. The first part is the armhole decrease match. And what that means is that the cap's not sitting on its own. It's going to be put into a garment, and we have already planned the garment. So we know that we know what we did for the first two bind-offs on the garment. So we took out 3 stitches on each side. So we're going to start by using up 2 rows. That's going to be the armhole decrease match. And we're going to take out 6 stitches over those 2 rows, 3 on each side. Right, so then we go to the top, and we say, okay, we know at the top slope, we want to take out 2 inches of stitches over a 1/2 inch of rows. So it's 1 inch of stitches on each side over a 1/2 inch of rows. And then the final bind off, we want to say, how do we determine how wide our final bind off is going to be at the top? And what we do is we simply we divide our upper arm by 4 and then take off 1/4 of an inch. And that gives us the final bind off. But what I'm going to do is just take a look at laying out all the things we need to know as we start to shape this cap. So the first thing is, of course, the gauge. 5 stitches and 6 rows to an inch, because we've got the same gauge on the body. Well, how many inches do I have as I'm starting off? At the top of my sleeve, we have 15 inches, and that represents 78 stitches, which is 76 plus the 2 selvage stitches. So my first armhole bind off is going to take place over 2 rows. It's going to be 6 stitches over 2 rows. Remind myself of that. The total depth of the armhole is 8 1/4 inches. We know that translated into 50 rows, but it's 8 1/4 inches, that the inches we're going to be concerned about. And then 1 inch, we want to round the stitches to an even number, and we want to round the rows to an even number. So as we prepare to do that top slope, we say 1 inch of stitches rounded to the nearest even number. As we go up, we're getting 5 stitches to an inch. We're going to go to 6. And then a 1/2 inch of rows. If we take our 6 rows to an inch and we divide it in half, it's 3 rows. We want to also round that, so it's going to be 4. Looking at that right away, it's going to tell me that at the end, when I'm doing my top slope, if I want 2 inches of stitches coming out, 1 on each side, over a 1/2 inch of rows, that I'm going to have 12 stitches coming out over the last 4 rows. So we've got that sort of figured out at the top. Then going back to what's going to happen at the final bind off, taking a look at my 15 inches in my upper arm, dividing it by 4, which is going to give me 3 3/4 inches, and then taking off that 1/4 of an inch gives me 3 1/2 inches. That's going to be the width of my final bind off. If I multiply that by my stitch gauge, which is 5 stitches to an inch, it's going to be 18 stitches. So a lot of the answers that I need are here. So you can see that I've got the armhole decrease figured out, right? 3 stitches on each side, which is 6 stitches over 2 rows. I've got the top slope all worked out. That is 1 stitch, 1 inch of rounded stitches on each side. So that's 2 inches of rounded stitches over a 1/2 inch of rows, which is 4 rows. And I've got the final bind off all worked out. And that is that I took my upper arm width, which is 15, divided it by 4, and then took off a 1/4 of an inch. So it left me with 3 1/2 inches. I multiplied that by 5, which is my stitch gauge, and I have 18 stitches at the top. So that's done. What I don't have is my center. After we take out everything what's remaining lets me know that that's what we're going to have to work, the number of rows and the number of stitches in the center of the cap. So next page, Quinn. All right, so here is a page that you'll see, and you'll have a blank of this to be able to fill out for your caps. And so there's just the very first thing I want to see is, how long is my cap going to be? What is my cap depth? We take armhole depth, which is 8 1/4, minus 1 1/2, and I'll explain that in just a second, minus half the final bind off, just that fast. You multiply it by the whatever you get by the row gauge, and you've got it. So the armhole depth is 8 1/4 minus 1 1/2, which is going to leave us with 6 3/4 minus half the final bind off. The final bind off is 3 1/2 divided by 2 is 1 3/4. This is going to give us 5 inches. So the cap is going to be 5 inches long, multiplied by 6, which is my row gauge, which tells me that I'm going to have 30 rows in my cap. So between the 78 at the bottom and the 18 at the top, right, this is all that, I'm going to have to take out something in the middle. Okay? So, oh, and I'm going to have to do that over 30 rows. All right, so next, if we take a look down at the 4 into 12, it tells me that on the last 4 rows, then I'm going to take out 3 stitches on every one of those rows, which is going to give me the 6 on each side. So let's go to the next page, Quinn. All right, so we look at this, we look at the full run out of what we know, and then what we don't know will appear. So here we've got 78 stitches in the upper arm. We're taking out 6 for the first armhole decrease. This is stitches, and then we're going to do rows. And then we're taking out 12 stitches more for the top slope. It's going to leave me at 60. And then I'm going to have to account for 18 of those stitches. I need to take those out too, because that's going to be in the final bind off. So those are all the stitches we're using up here. But we've got 42 that we aren't using. That's what's going to be in the center cap. We know everything else. What we don't know is the center cap. That's what we're figuring out. It's like X. And so we have 42 center cap stitches. And then for the rows, how many rows will those 42 stitches have to come out over? We have 30 rows starting. Those are the total cap rows. The armhole decreases, we're going to use up 2. That's going to leave me with 28. And then at the top of the cap, I'm using the 4, where I'm taking out the 12 stitches over the 4 rows. So that's going to leave me with 24 stitches, 24 rows, pardon me, that we don't have anything to do with, or we don't know what's going to happen with them. So we're going to put them in the center. So the center, we now know, is going to consist of 24 rows and 42 stitches being decreased over those 24 rows. So we have a math check, as we always do, just to make sure that everything's okay. And so if we look at the stitches, again, 78 at the upper arm, 6 being taken out, an armhole decrease, leaving 72. Then we're stacking them now. Now we know what's in the center cap, so we're decreasing as we go up. Then from the center, we're taking out 42, leaving us 30. Then we have the top slope, taking out 12, using up 12 stitches, and we're leaving 18 at the final bind off. So that just solidifies the fact that this is correct. Then we go to the rows. We're adding these together to see if we're going to come up to the total. We have 2 armhole decrease rows. We have 24 center cap rows that come just above that. We have 4 top slope rows, which gives us a total of 30 rows. So that's what we're going to focus on as we move into how do we do the center cap. Okay, how do we plan that? Next, so here's the center cap. This is the ratio tool, which is increase and decreasing formula with making interspersing a part of that. so that we have averages, we have a ratio here. So 24 divided into 42, we start to see that this gives us answers to many things. It sort of morphs into whatever we want it to. We need to know how many times are we going to take out one stitch and how many times are we going to take out two stitches. And so the 28 into 42 tells us that 6 times we're going to take out one stitch, and 18 times we're going to take out two stitches. So when you see that crossing, what's at the bottom of it is telling you the number of times. Top is telling you the number of stitches, okay? And so now we say, all right, so what does that mean in terms of pairs? Because each time I'm working two sides of my cap. And so we just divide that number in half. And it tells me that the pair decreases, meaning, you know, right side rows, wrong side rows, are going to be 9 and 3. And then we look for a common denominator, you know, a number that will go into both and that will tell me the number of times I'm going to work this pairing. And so we see 3 will go into both. And so the pairing is going to be 2 stitches 3 times in pairs to 1 stitch once. And that's going to be the interspersing decrease. And we look out at our math check and we see the 1 times 6 being 6 and the 2 times 18 being 36. So we know that it's 24 and 42. We're continuing to always go back and check because, you know, with numbers, they can move around on you. All right, next, Quinn, next. So this is what this looks like. The rows are paired, you know, 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We see that 3 times. And we have 12 and 2 each time. We have 2, 2, 2, which are 3 sets of 2 stitches coming out. You know that those are the paired, right side, wrong side, or we're pairing them. And then 1 with the right side, wrong side. And then we repeat that 2 times. So we have 42 stitches decreased over our 24 rows. And this gives it all to us at a glance. Okay, next. So this is the way it's going to run out for us. We can see right away, you know, right side and wrong sides that we're starting with, we've ended with a wrong side as we finished shaping our sleeve and got to the 78 stitches. And now on the next right side, we start with the 3 coming out, and then on the following wrong side, we've got 3 coming out. That's the armhole match. And then as we go up, we've got 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. And then next page, so we see that coming out in the center cap. That's the way the center cap's going to be shaped. And then we have the 3, 3, 3, 3, which is, you see on both sides, we've got 1 inch of stitches coming out, rounded up to the 6, over the last 4 rows. And the final bind off, we've used up all 30 rows. On row 31, we've got 18 stitches remaining, and we see how that's running for us. And so we have the summary here. The stitches decreased in the math check, always again the math check. Armhole, stitches 6, center cap 42, slope, top slope 12, final bind off 18, upper arm total, which is because we haven't started knitting yet until we've done all this, back to our upper arm total is that 78. Okay, so that's it. Next page. This is the run out. This is the actual representation, the charted representation of what our cap is going to look like. It's a little lower, a little wider, because we've got more stitches to get out than we have rows. We've got to get out 42 stitches over only 24 rows. So we see at the bottom right away, we see the 3 and the 3, and then we see the 2, 2, 2, 1, the 2, 2, 2, 1, the 2, 2, 2, 1. Then we see the 3, 3, 3, 3, and the 18 at the very top. And so this is just a drawn representation of what the sleeve cap is going to look like. So next. All right, so just to look at what some of the double taper, which is what we focused on today, what a double taper body would look like. This is a double taper with V-neck. It also has lapels put on it, but that is an example, one of my pieces. Next. This is another one. Another example of one of my pieces where we have, the lines following the natural lines, curves of the body. Next. This is just a look at charting and deconstructing, pretty much. Quinn, if we can go to the page beyond this. No, yeah. This is the main, and you've seen this on the cables chart. This is the main chart that we're using. But within that main chart, as I'm looking, I'm seeing what can I put at the edges, what can I echo from that chart that will have the eye have a wonderful visual experience looking at my piece of art. And so I'm seeing those little like crosses there. And so flip back to the page before. Gwen, go back one page. Yeah. So I'm taking those out. And I'm making a separate chart for those. And I'm making that chart, it's got its own life going here. It's a 12-stitch rep, and it's, whatever's going on with it, interspersing. And I'm putting those at the edges and around the bottom of my garment. And I'm making a flow so that they flow directly into the pattern. I know they can flow in and out because I'm looking at the pattern. And this I'm looking at putting both charts together from the basic pattern stitch. And this is something you may want to think about as you look at how you're going to start and end, or edgings or collars or whatever you're going to put on to your garment. Okay, so we can go through the next slide, Quinn. And then, yeah, there you go. And so here, just thinking, as I always say, this is handmade artwork. And so we always want to think about that. How do we let people really appreciate all that we do with 2 sticks and some string, and how beautiful that can be? The knitter on this was Mari Tabita. And we had 4 weeks to do this. All of those of you who came through the KAL saw the P code. And if you're looking at my, at the front of this piece, as well as if at the front of my book, you see that red P code. Lisa Hoffman was the knitter on that. And these all happened 12 years ago, but we had 4 weeks to get this done. As Mari said, big project. But if you look at that, we've got some close-ups where you see the flow and how important it is that all the patterns flow one into another seamlessly. And if you look at the collar at the top, and these pictures are all taken from the book, so you have the book, you can see that the little veins that come down, the twist stitches, the single lines of the twist stitches that come down from the collar itself run directly into, and that's seamed on, but we've lined it up, the ruffle that goes around the collar. You see that very close up on the back. Then you may have heard me say last week, I'm always nervous when they take these close pictures that, they're going to find something that doesn't match. But we try to make sure we take care of it. But, we're human. Periodically, we go astray too. But it is our artwork, and we are proud of it when it's out, want to be proud of it when it's out there. And then if we look at the sleeve, just below that, and her arm hanging down, and how, the sleeve, we have a line that's like a zigzag line, horizontally zigzagging line of twist stitches, how that runs from the sleeve right across the back, how that will line up once she puts her arm down when she's out in her evening piece or out in the woods. We have this also done in 2 separate pieces and 2 separate places. In duets, for example, we've got another garment that's done with the same elegance, but always keeping in mind that I always say that the pieces I make are timeless, can be worn by different generations and for different occasions, and that's the goal going in. All right, so here we see the total picture. We've got the covered buttons. We have here, you see the flow of the twisted stitches, here meaning off to the left, from that bell cuff into the actual pattern of the sleeve. And so all of it comes together just to give a wonderful visual stimulation and just to show the world how wonderful and beautiful hand knitting is. All right, so that's one reason we've got this up here. It also happens to be a double taper. It's made using needle size changes, regauging, but it is an example of a V-neck and a double taper as well. Okay, next, Quinn. All right, so this is another piece, and this is another one of the cables patterns that are part of DAL 6. And just to see where they took the photographs for the magazine, this was featured in Interweave's Knits. It's called the Fauna Pullover. And when she has her arms down, again, you see, if you're going from the right side photograph, you see how everything runs across the body. And all that depends on where you start shaping your sleeve cap from. Because remember, this is a set-in sleeve. And so to make sure that that happens, whether you're doing a colored piece or a piece that has a pattern on it, I rarely use stockinette. I love pattern stitches and the mathematics of making them balance and all that, but making sure that this runs directly across. Also, at the bottom, how did I get a starting point to have my ribbing run into the pattern seamlessly? You know, just continue its journey into that pattern stitch. And that's what you see when you see the close-up of the cuff of the sleeve as well as the body of that garment. And those are things as you design and you're looking at stitch patterns and you're looking at charts and you're swatching, you're telling your story. I'm showing you mine, but you've got your own. But those are some of the things that you will want to consider for your art. All right, I think this may be it. Quinn, is this the end? Next? Yeah, that's the end of the presentation. So now we can go to questions, if anybody has any questions. Are there questions coming in, Joan, Maury, Lisa, in the chat box?
Yes, there are a few.
Okay.
Let me see. Gail, I think you had a question about bust darts. So why don't you unmute yourself and ask Shirley?
Yeah, Shirley, I have a rather, well, not a huge bust, but on the large size, and I usually have to put in bust darts so that I keep a straight bottom. How would you want us to handle that? I'm like between an E and an F cup.
Yeah, well, with bust darts, it depends on they work really best with stockinette if you're doing stockinette, but it's decreasing. I think we took it down, but on my website I had a whole, and I can send that out, a whole summary of how to work bust darts. And all that is, it's just a matter of working short rows. And as with any
Right.
other, use of the short rows, because you just want to put, whether it's a tummy that may be a little, larger, whatever, wherever you want to put short rows in to add extra width in that area without actually adding the length, then, just do it.
Would you want us to show that in the schematic
Yeah.
if we're doing it?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Just share it in the schematic. You can share it, because it would be, coming down on the sides, and you can share it just in the schematic, or you can do a graphed representation of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Other questions?
Mary Beth and Lorraine had a question about the V-neck option. So do one of you want to unmute and ask the question, or both of you?
Well, I think Lorraine said it first, and I was just sort of tagging on it. It's come up with a few of the things. Same thing with the sleeve shaping. I'm actually comfortable with all the math, but I'm wondering how these play out in our design choices. So like once I designed what to do, I'm good to go with the schematic creation. But how do we decide, like that last picture you showed that had the wide neck and that was a V, was that a concave V? Was it a straight V? When we do a a sleeve cap or whatever, whether it's a modified drop or a standard set-in sleeve, like how do we choose some of those choices? Like for me, I know we're getting off the subject a little bit on the sleeve cap, but like I want to do a modified drop, and how far is that, and how do we decide those things?
Well, are you in the classic, or are you have to be in the classic if you're not doing a set-in, right? You're in your class, you're in the classic part of the DAL.
What? No, competition.
If you're competing,
Drop
then
shoulder was one of the options.
yeah, what job shoulder was one of the options, but okay. Just look at the book. I mean, pretty much,
I know.
it's your design choice, right?
Right. And that's why I just don't know what to base the choice on. That's
Look at one of your garments. I mean, you're making a drop shoulder for some reason. It's a comfort for you to design or to wear, or that you feel you're making a pattern if you're competing that you feel a lot of the world will want to wear because you're going into an international magazine if you win, and your people are going to make that piece. And it's going to be shown everywhere. So lots of people are going to want to knit it. There's a reason why you probably want to do that. And so you have an idea of, maybe you like you like your pattern to have more of a roomy fit, or that you feel people can use it as a utilitarian garment. Whatever you put on your DPO, your design profile outline, as you thought about profiling that garment, then and how your pattern stitch is going to flow. I mean, those are all your design choices. I'm not sure if I'm not being cavalier, and I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, and I want to. So tell me if I've answered your question.
kind of, because I definitely get the put on sweaters that you have, and but if I don't actually have a sweater that I love the fit of, that it has a modified drop shoulder, like are there, like the book, I looked extensively at the book because I want to make sure I'm not asking questions that are already answered. But it's sort of like, have this be 1 to 2 inches, so if I'm designing for a size small, like if a set-in sleeve is going to sit right there, then how far off am I going for a modified drop? Or is it just in relation to the bust to shoulder? How much in am I coming?
A drop can be the same as the set-in, because for the set-in, what you're doing is you're measuring from the back of your shoulder, that
Okay.
shoulder bone, down to your armpit. And that's what you see on Measurement Lady. We gave her out last week, and we gave the individual measurement guides. You're going down to your armpit. And then you're deciding on how much ease you want in that armpit. I mean, that's just the starting measure. It's like you measure your body, and that's the exact, but you don't want it to feel like it look like it's poured on or painted on, so you add ease in. The same thing for length ease. So you will add, usually it's about 1 inch that you would add of length ease from your armpit down and you can do the same with the drop shoulder. I know that lots of patterns say, take your armhole depth and multiply it by 2. You don't have to. You can open that up or keep it as narrow or as short as you want. Like whenever I've done drop shoulders, I've always done just whatever. If I want 8 inches, that's it. It doesn't have to be 8 inch times. It doesn't have to be that wide so that it really hangs underneath. So you can do it so that it fits in, and it fits almost like a set in, or you may want it to be a garment that gives a little bit more ease for maybe a more casual look. I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish, and so you may want to add just an extra 1/2 inch of depth in your armhole depth. You maybe want to do that, because if you're doing a modified drop, you're just taking everything out at one time.
Right.
Right, it's like a notch that you're fitting everything into. And if you look at my picture of that in the KDW, it's a pink garment
Okay.
that has all the cables running through it. And I wanted it to be very, very classic, but a little more casual. So I want a little more width in that area. And so, but it still has a very good fit, but it has maybe like a 1/2 inch more drop than I would have put into a set-in.
Okay. I feel like I've cannibalized a lot of time, and Lorraine's question, which was more about the neck, and again, sort of how do you what does it look like? What does a concave neck look like? And what is it, how do you decide which you're doing?
Okay, so charting paper is where I start. I think they had a 5-year memory of from Craftsy, and it was on Facebook. And I think we posted it on the Ravelry when they were opening up my chart. And all the technical people were standing there just amazed at the charts and how big my charts are. Because I need to see everything. Everybody doesn't need to see everything. I need to see where everything's going because I work with pattern stitches all the time. And that the beauty of the flow and the break of that is very important to me. Every designer has their own way. That just happens to be mine. And so, I always say, when you make that curve for your sleeve, when you're making the curve for the armhole, when you're laying out the V, here's a piece of charting paper. And a pencil. Just draw it out and see if you like the way it looks the way it's running. I do a straight V all the time. I just happen to like that. And that's why I do the interspersing, and I usually do a two bind off V, but it depends on my pattern stitch. If my pattern stitch is odd, then I can do a single, where I take out one stitch and then shape on the both sides of that. But those are things that you really, as a designer, will just chart out and take a look at and see if you like it or not. And then if you're doing a concave, for example, just put a few stitches on the needle. I'm swatching all the time. And when it's time to send in a submission or whatever, I'm not starting to do anything. I'm just pulling out what I've already got because it's working all the time, because it's my profession. But just charting things out, taking a look at it, and seeing, do I like this? Like for an armhole shaping, is it coming in too fast? Where is it going to fall on that pattern? Do I want to slow that down? And do I like that curve for the neck shaping, for the round neck shaping? Do I want a deeper round neck, like more scoop? Do I want a higher round neck? How much do I want to take out at the beginning? Maybe I want to take out a little bit more. Maybe I don't want to take a full 1/2 inch from my shoulder width. Let me take a look and see how that looks and how that's going to translate on my pattern. Because all those things have to come together. And I think I told the people last night, everyone in the competitive section will be reporting to me as their coach directly.
Oh.
So any questions that you have, the whole job of the coaches is to help you and to make sure that whatever you're doing will be successful. We are a help team. And so I will be going through every number that you put on your schematics and working with you to make sure that we are accomplishing what you want to accomplish.
So our schematics might get tweaked after we start the coaching.
No, your schematics will get tweaked.
Okay, excellent.
Not a question of maybe.
So
And that is for people who've been through this, and a lot of people in the DALs have been through it before. They know that it comes back with a lot of different notes on it. But everyone, you see duets as a result of this. The book that we put out, that we've all been able to publish things that we're very proud of. And yeah, someone wrote a note in her blog that said the force is definitely with this one. Because of all the things that I went through. Because, of course, we've been doing this for a long time. And things will catch our eyes very quickly. And that is a part of what the advantage of having a coach is all about. And that's why I love doing these.
Thank you.
Okay.
I would like to, and I can ask on Ravelry too. My brain is great on everything that's on the paper, but it's not bridging into the real life. And there must be some way other than making 50 different sweaters to help me bridge that gap. And I'm thinking maybe I can go buy like builder's construction paper and just cut out like pattern pieces. I don't know how to make my brain bridge the gap. And maybe you don't know either.
Because I don't know what your brain does. I'm sure it does wonderful things. And when you say it doesn't bridge the gap, um, I don't understand between the paper and the reality. So maybe
Like if
just
I had the knitter's graph paper that you can print out that's in the gauge, and I had like one of those duct tape things, which if it wasn't for COVID, I would have made one by now, but I can't get anybody to my house. I would just be taping the knitter's graph paper all over the model, but I can't do that. So how do I? Is there some way to bridge? Because to me, all of this is flat, and I'm a 3D thinker.
okay.
Think anything flat, and trying to get the flat to go in 3 dimensions is really
The two things that I'll say, first of all, is that you can get a large piece of you can take your pattern stitch, take a charted version of it, and photocopy it a number of times. That might help, and then make a big chart, and then do what I do, and then draw on that chart so that you see everything exactly as it's going to be. I have to see that. I need to know where my neckline's going to start, where this is going to start, where that's going to start. I don't know what kind of a thinker I am, but that just is the part of what I want to see because I want it to be a certain way when I see the garment made. So that's one way. The other way is that you may just need to knit small pieces. You may have to if that's the only way you can see it. Like you may say, I want my armhole to curve this way. You may have to just, put on a few stitches and knit that curve to see that it works okay if you have to see it. And so for me, I'll tell you, when I started writing my first book, which is 344 pages, I could not compose on the computer. So I sat writing everything. And one of the chapters was 25,000 words. And so my team was saying, you can't do this. You have to learn how to compose on the computer. And so I started. And it was hard because my brain was dumping it into my hand, not, through a typewritten thing. Now I always compose on the computer. So you may try different things that may sort of push you in that direction, like making the big charts with your, just repeating and then photocopying that at a larger shop where you can paste it together again and then drawing on. You may be able to do that. Or as I said, if you can't, then you may have to be able to do small swatches to just get an idea. Somehow I think you will be able to marry that. In my cast-ons class, I make everyone turn everything around. And so we can cast on with both hands, especially with the long tail series. Most people cast on with their left hand. I am not a lefty, but most people who are right cast on left because that's the way they've been taught. But as I always say, so you always have that extra row that you have to come back across the row. I'm self-taught, by the way, with knitting 100%. And so I've had to think all these things through. And so as soon as we start doing it, it takes a little while, but then everybody sort of, they sort of get it. So I would just say try and try different things. Are you in the classic part of the DAL, or are you in the computing part?
the classic. I think that there is so much that I need to learn. I think after I got through this whole process once and got all of the pieces together, because I typically need to know 100% of everything before I get frozen unless I know everything, and not most people are not that way. So, and it's better for me to like keep going and then once I get somewhere, it'll click, but it's not there yet.
All right, and take your time.
Yeah.
Nobody's rushing you. And my grandmother used to always say, keep going, the light will come on. Like you'd ask her a question, she wouldn't give you the answer. And she'd say, just, you're okay. I'd say, what do you mean? What do I do? Keep going, the light will come on. So now I have one student who says that she hears my grandmother, not hers, but she hears my grandmother talking to her when she's working. But it is true that the beginning of everything is fog.
Yeah.
for all of us. We've all been lost driving somewhere, and then, we move into a new neighborhood. And then the third time, the fifth time, then we just can do it with our eyes closed. So the beginning of everything is fog. Just have that faith. All of you have lived a lot of years. I don't teach children. You're all adults. Everything you walk into this DAL or into a room with, everything you've ever learned in life comes with you. And so we reach back and we pull from all of that. We don't even realize how much is in there. And so that's all I say, is that this is not something that you can't do. It is something that you may have to practice or learn some new skills with. That those skills will always be at the ready in the future when you need them. Just maybe it's just a bridge that you need to go over. And I say in every DL I learn. In my classes, a lot of things that I've added, I've been teaching now. I'm going into the 30th year of my business. I introduced my business in 1992. And so in my classes, the KAL's been out, KDW's been out for 12 years. There's always someone who sees something differently than I do that helps me to learn something else. Even with that formula. When you go to the ratio, I was teaching it in one class and someone said, each time you find a common denominator, does that mean that's the number of times that ratio is going to be repeated? Well, I had never thought about that, because when it comes to the bottom and I'm seeing the 3 and the 1, for example, is 4, then I always divide that into the total number, and then that tells me. But it's that I hadn't noticed that was always the same number that I was getting immediately with the common denominator. So I didn't have to go that far. That came from a student. That whole story of being able to come back to the front of the garment each time, which is a very powerful tool when you're planning and when you're designing, and when you're designing more than one piece at the same time. I taught that class. Joan was in the class. Mari's been in the class. When I did it a different way, and it was so convoluted. The whole class would just sit there staring at me. And as a teacher, you're like, why did I get up and come to work today? Because what I gave, nobody understood. And that's no fun. You want everybody to be with you, to understand, to think you helped to disseminate something, open up something, and people are just looking at you. And that's what was happening. And then finally, Mari said, she had taken the class twice, and she's like, let's get to the bottom of this. And she said just 4 words. She said, I think must make round trip. That clicked in my mind on how to present that. Okay, making the round trip, take the other rows out. And so that came from that. Susan Barron, she was in the capstone program at that time. She's now, one of the technical people for webs, is the person who asked me, is it always going to be, the common denominator is always going to be the number of times? And that has happened over and over again. So each time, it's a learning experience for me. It will be a learning experience for the coaches. It will be a learning experience for you. That's what it's all about. Yeah. And that will continue to be a part of what you will introduce as you go forward. And as I said with everyone, I've got my way of that's worked for me, that I've taught myself. And I've added on, because I'm open to learning, because there's a lot of stuff I don't know, obviously, all of us. And you've got yours. And you've studied with other people as well. And you'll combine those and make them your own. And I'm not asking anyone to fit into a box, to just do it this way. I'm showing you a way that can help you to organize your work, that's worked for me, and kept me from falling into holes that at the beginning I didn't know what I was doing. So I'm trying to impart that to you. That's what I did with the Knitwear Design Workshop. But it's not the be-all and end-all. And for every learning type, it may not be perfect. I've had people come to my classes that I've said, don't take my classes anymore. And everyone knows that I've said that. They come, and it's like a person who can play by ear and a person who plays classic, who's classically trained. They're both very talented. It's amazing, but it's different. And so someone who comes and who is just free form and who is amazingly talented is now trying to fit into my mathematical brain. And so they're going to lose their free form, and they're never going to fit 100% into my way. And I can see that right away. So it's like they say, it's a bottom between two chairs. You're never going to sit all the way in, but you're comfortable in one. And so I would say, your things are beautiful. I would advise you not to take my classes anymore, because they're going to ruin your whole creative flow. And it is wonderful. And that's just real. Everybody can't do everything. But we all can do most things that we aren't even aware of.
Yeah. I actually love your giant charts, but I don't do, what software do you use to
I
make?
don't use any software.
Okay,
I
so
don't use any software for anything. And my students laugh about that. I use a calculator and I hand draw.
okay, so you have like piles of graph paper.
I do.
Okay. All right, that works. Thank you.
Mhm.
You have a question from Brenda that's a little off topic, but it's an interesting question. So Brenda, do you want to ask that question?
Sure, thank you. Shirley, I am curious about your organization techniques behind. So when you have completed designs and you've got your swatch and your notes and so forth, do you put them in a pouch? Do you put them in a file cabinet? Do you put them in a binder? And then also, you obviously have multiple works in progress at the same time. And how do you keep those organized?
In binders, mostly in binders, and also on flash drives. You know, I scan things, put them on flash drives. Actually, Quinn is in the background, and you saw her changing everything for me. And she said she has never seen one person with so much stuff. And that is because, like now, we're going into a DAL. I went back, I have every page from previous DALs. I went back and pulled them out, the physical pages, and was able to look at, who was in DAL4, DAL3, what we did. All of that's very important for me. And I have binders. I have all kinds of binders of everything. And I do worksheets. My worksheets for when I come back to a design, it's not going to be sitting in my head. I've got to find that drawer and pull it open, because it may be like 10 designs ago. Maybe it's 100 designs ago. People come and ask me questions about designs that I did in 2002. I've done so many designs since then, and they're all different. I don't like to do the same thing over and over again, because I like to keep learning. And so how do I go back and know that and see that? And how can I help people, and how can I put it back in my mind again? And so I have my worksheets, physical worksheets, that all the numbers, I hand write all my numbers on my worksheets, because it makes me really connect. We all have our own way, but it makes me really connect, and drawing out on my charts makes me connect to my work. And so I go back and I look at my worksheets. And I say the same thing when we were making Knit Ready Design Workshop, for example. I had 4 garments. I have 1 month to get all 4 of them knit. I had to keep writing. I have 4 different knitters on them. And I did all the worksheets for everybody and handed them out. And they're all so different. I've got the peacoat. The peacoat's got like a whole life going on, with like 70 pages of everything happening on it. And then I had the piece that is a pullover, that's a cable with a lace with a hood that comes up on it. And they're all different. You saw the duster, I had that as well. I've got the cable with the big collar. I have 4 completely different garments going on at the same time. And I say the same thing to anyone who's knitting for me, and that is that if there's ever a mistake, because sometimes when I transpose, they're the first test of my pattern. Sometimes when I transpose from the numbers to the written word, I make some mistakes. But always go back to my worksheets, is what I send them my worksheets. And I say always go back, because the numbers, it's a truth science, mathematics. If the numbers are wrong, they're wrong. Numbers will always work. And so then we can find out exactly where I didn't write it right in the words. And so for me, keeping everything in order is, obviously, yeah, I'm, anal beyond belief. But that is also very, very important to me. And it's also, in life, I'm writing my story. We all are. What's back there when I'm not here? Or if somebody else wants to just come and peruse or whatever. And I like, I don't know what I did with it. I don't want that. I always want to know what I did. And sometimes I'll say, oh, I want to add this to my collar or something. But I remember I did that in one of my garments. And then, oh, it was that one. I can pull it out and I can look at it. So I don't know, if if that answers your question, but that's the way I work.
That's helpful, and I can see where binders would work. And while you're very organized, I'm kind of like, oh, it's a mishmash. Underneath it's organized. But I also too, like you mentioned, you do it all by hand, and I'm very much also by hand, because for me as well, it sinks in better. But then scanning everything too to have a digital copy also helps. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Jamie raised her hand.
Okay.
I think it's Jamie.
Yes. Hi, Shirley. I had a question about submissions for the competition. I wasn't clear on if you're competing on what designs were going to be chosen. I looked at the email, like the official methods for competitors is, this type of silhouette, this type of shoulder, etc. And when I wrote and submitted like my profile outline and all of that other stuff, like I had something else in mind. And if I had known, I think that I was going to be limited to this first set of, you can make this shape in this shoulder, I might have done that differently.
Right. It wasn't
Would
a
I be
shoulder
able to
shaping.
resubmit?
There was nothing on the shoulder shaping. It was the body shaping. That was what I
Okay.
taught, what I had planned to teach. It's what's in my my craftsy class as well, for those of you. So it's so people can easily, sorry to interrupt you, but people can easily access it, access the information to be able to put together a design in a very guided way, aside from my book. And so I knew I would be teaching that. I also knew that it's what my app is there with that, because these are the most popular body shapes, not just for knitting garments, but for life. A classic body with a set-in sleeve. Everybody's got a jacket. That's what that's done with. So that's what the body shapes. Nothing ever said you couldn't shape your shoulders. Those body shapes, as you see, all the things I'm pulling up, I mean, that's like half the world. It's a very broad, how do we make the broadest way and make it in a way that we're going to have essentially about 6 weeks of knitting. How do we get people to be able to cross those bridges? Those are decisions we have to make for the whole group. We got 82 of you that are coming with us on this journey. And so that's what.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But when I was writing like my little profile outline, like I want this sweater to be like to evoke this feeling, and I want it to be used for this purpose. I was thinking of a different construction method. Like I have never done it a flat design. I always knit in the round. And so when I was thinking about like the kind of neckline that I wanted to have and that sort of thing, I submitted for like a hexagon shaped neckline, but obviously that's not going to be allowed if you're competing. So I wanted to know if I can go in and change my submission to better fit the competition, because I didn't realize that we were going to be limited to V-neck, scoop neck, that kind of thing. If that makes sense.
If you're competing, then everything will be coming to me. So I'll take a look at what you send in for your schematic. Just send in what you want. You don't have to resubmit. Just send in what you're doing for your schematic, because now everybody knows. And, and that's it. I mean, you'll have a private coach, which will be me.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure that, like, if my final product didn't match in any way my original submission, if that was going to be okay.
It'll be okay. Yeah, it'll be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine. Because now, and you can just make a note if you want, just say, this is where I'm going. But now you've done that, in the way you're going to lay out your schematic. So your schematic will come in within the parameters. So I'm going to look at what I'm receiving versus what I received in the submission. My focus is going to be making sure you have a very good schematic and that you're ready to knit checking the schematics is preparing you to knit your piece, and that that you're going to end up with what you want, and that will be just a back and forth conversation with us and with all your coaches. But those of you who are competing, of course, I'll be the coach, so that's where that will be.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Great, you're welcome. Anybody else?
Lisa had an interesting comment.
Okay.
So Lisa's one of the coaches. So Lisa, do you want to say what you said?
Well, I think as I was writing it, Shirley actually said it. So, but I just pressed enter anyway. That your design will probably change from your original submission. As you said, it might, as you do your swatching and go into your schematic, and the coaches, that's what we're going to help you do when you move into the next step. We'll help you get to your schematic, but it does not have to be exactly what your submission was, and you don't have to resubmit, which is just what you said.
Yeah, that's just true. Yeah, because we're going to look at what you're sending us, and we're going to try to help you to be able to get that piece ready, to have on it all the things that you want to accomplish through your design. Yes. Okay. Are there any other questions, John?
No,
Or
that's
anybody
it.
see coming in? Great.
All I
So,
see right now.
huh?
That's all I see right now.
Okay, so I hope I've answered everybody's questions, and we're going to get the handouts for what I presented today. It's all in KDW, but though some of you are in Craftsy where I'm talking to you for 12 lessons, and you can run that back over and over again. So it's always good to see it and have maybe me do a little different version of it. It's not going to be appreciably different because I'm doing the same thing, pretty much. It's my way is my way, and KDW pretty much tells you all of that. And it's just really to help you to get a really good understanding of what we want to see in your design. And it's not just us. I mean, you're going into a magazine environment. We've all been there, and we've all had our first magazine, exposure, and we understand that. And so that's what we're going to try to help you to do. And I just want you to remember that it's not for you anymore. It's for a knitting public. And that is what I say when I make my garments. And that is, if something is on it that it's too complex, I'll usually eliminate it and say, if when I put this garment out in the world, 2 people on earth could knit it, I was one and maybe my knitter, then that's not going to be good, because I want to see it out there. That's why I'm out there. I'm competing. All of us are competing each time we step up and submit our things to a magazine. I've gotten rejection letters just like everybody else, and so we always want to make sure that we are remembering that it's not just my own piece that I can put 25 things on it and whatever. It's that people are going to look at what will attract an audience that will want to make your piece. And so that is some of what we want you to think about, and that's what we'll be looking for, a lot of different things, and we'll be talking to you. But at the end of the day, it's all your decision. It's all your design, how you shape at the ultimate way, how you shape your armhole, or to accomplish what we want you to, or how you shape your neck, all that. Those are all going to be your decisions, and your own creative journey is what we want you to experience. We're just standing here to help you where you need it, wherever you say you need it. And for all of us, it's going to be learning experiences. Many of us have done, certain things the same way, or it's always good. It's always good to keep having more skills in our tool bag. And so that's a part of what this will be as well. My first DAL, we had a write-up about it shortly afterwards. My book Knitwear Design Workshop had just been introduced in 2010. We did a DAL like a month later. And it was the first time I had done anything online. And it was, we had the Japanese knitters, and we had, we all speak knitting, and we all speak design, and we had the American knitters, and we had people come from Australia, and everybody. It was just wonderful to see all of us, together joining hands. And at the same time, it was a whole new story for us. And it turned out to just be a wonderful story, which is why we've repeated it. Now we're into our sixth time. So I hopefully you'll walk away with being an addition to this wonderful ongoing story.
Shirley, just one last question Gazelle had about submitting the schematics. Is it going to be the same way that they submitted the submissions?
Yeah, we're pretty much thinking, yeah, that it's going to be a form that they're going to upload. Yeah.
Okay.
So and that information will be coming. The schematics are due on the 18th. A lot of you've already started ordering your yarn. The swatching yarn has gone out to the competitors. A lot of you start ordering your actual yarn for your garments already. And so people are already starting to get involved with that. So by the 18th of February, we're on the 5th now, we will then be looking at your schematics coming in. Some of you will do it early or whatever, but take your time. Make your swatch, not a rush. It's just like, it's a rush, but it's a controlled rush. It's like people say, I can only make 4 inches. Why? You're going to spend hours making a whole lot of inches, on your garment, and you may have to rip it out because you didn't just take that time. It's like you've got dinner guests coming. You got to take the time to prep what you're going to make and then bake it or cook it or whatever. It's the same thing with knitting. There's prep time and then there's knitting time. And right now, you've done 2 steps of the 4 steps of the design process. You've done your DPO, which means that you've done your thought process, you've done the sketch, you've done the fabric selection process. And now we're coming into the 3rd step, and that is the planning process when you're laying out your schematic and all that, and looking at that swatch, feeling it, laying out the schematic. And then the 4th step is just knitting it. That's the end. After you've chopped and cut and whatever, you got it in the pot. That's it. So I always say our approach is architectural. That is that by the time you see a building coming out of the ground, that's the last step. So much has gone into planning and designing that. And that's what we do too, to take the time. I always say, can you imagine an architect who would build the building and tear it down? Build it and tear it down until you got it right? I mean, that's the equivalent of us knitting and ripping out, when you could just plan it first. So we're in the planning process right now. And then, like me giving out those 4 different patterns when everybody was knitting together when I was writing the book, it's like the architect, roll up, put it under your arm. You've got it in a bag, hand it out, you knit it, when you're ready to knit, that's the next step after this. You got 1 more level to get through. We're on level 3 now. Everyone showed up. Who showed up for the kickoff calls, because I always say sign up, show up, suit up, all different. And so who's serious? Everyone who showed up for the kickoff calls went to the next level. Everyone who did their DPO and their submissions went to the next level. The next level will be the schematics. Everyone who sends in their schematics goes into level 4. And then we're off and running. We're off and running on the knitting level, and that is actually the most fun. So it's like eating that meal after you've done all the chopping and cutting. And I always love it when it's taken me like 2 days and people eat it in 10 minutes. But it's the reality of what happens and the joy that we get from watching people eat a meal that we've made or loving and wanting to make a garment that we've designed. It's all a wonderful creative process. And that's where we are, and I wish everybody luck, including me. I'm doing a design myself right now. Yes, Lisa.
Shirley, I think I just want to clarify because people are concerned about when the coaching starts.
Okay.
So that's going to start after the schematics
Right.
so the learning part from your classes is for them to do the schematics, for everyone to do the work that our and their schematics. And then once the schematics are in, we're going to help tweak them to, find any errors or where they might need help. That's where the coaching comes in. Am I correct?
You're 100% correct. Right now, there's nothing really to coach. We're doing what we can by giving you the classes. to really, and you've got the books, you've got the classes to really help you to understand where we are. And all of you are knitters, or you obviously, I don't think you'd be here. And if you're knitters, most of you have seen schematics in books. Most of you have made garments. And so you can go back and use those books, use my book to refresh your memory. But all of that now is just you creating your piece. You're the designer. And then when you've got your schematic laid out and your swatch, and you can write us and talk to us about it, then it's time for us to step in and stand beside you to help you to bring your design ideas to life. So that is pretty much it. And if there are no more questions, I thank all of you for coming. And we are 3 minutes ahead for those of you who planned for this two-hour story. And I look forward to seeing your submissions. We've got, in 2 weeks, we've got a speaker. When we come back on, Norgong will be speaking to us. She's the editor-in-chief of Vogue Knitting. And so that should be a lot of fun as well. And then we have a few speakers. She's also one of the judges, will be one of the judges. We have nothing to do with judging. We just are helping. So we have a few speakers that you've seen on the lineup, on the calendar, who will be speaking to you. And they are primarily the groups that we're involved with for the yarn. They are all very big in the industry and providing really wonderful yarns for us, wonderful designs and patterns, and they all have wonderful stories. So that's what will happen going forward. But okay, we look
Thanks,
forward to seeing you.
Shirley.
All right, bye everybody. Thanks for coming.